Namaskaram, Adab, Sat Sri Akal, and a very good evening to all. Well, I'm Gopal Nair, and I'm delighted to be here, and I have been given this huge responsibility of chairing this amazing webinar. Uh, to have the commencement of this webinar registered formally, I would like to start this with an altruistic Sanskrit shloka as the Karakia for the day. So this goes as Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukh bhag bhavet. The sloka is its origin has not been found, but some elements of this has been found in quite a lot of Vedic texts. And this shloka means, may all sentient beings be at peace. May no one suffer from illness. May all see what is auspicious. May no one face sorrow. Now, I've changed one of the words in the translation of this. It said, "May no one suffer from disabilities," which is it's a very broader, kind of usage of the term. So, and at the end, it says, Om Shanti, 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 which means Om, may there be peace, peace, peace. So, as we have officially launched, welcome again to this webinar. And introducing myself, I am Gopal Nair. I am a learner. I am a disability researcher, and I have been into the disability advocacy kind of sector. We've been working in this sector for a long time now, and I'm extremely proud of what I'm doing. Moving further, I would like to introduce our speakers for the day. I would first like to talk about Dr. Kuhana Hickey. Dr. Hickey has a long-standing interest in the human rights of people from marginal backgrounds and the consequences of discrimination and social oppression. She's a scholar of disabilities, research, and legal theory, and is noted for the breadth of her published cross-disciplinary research. Dr. Hickey currently sits on the New Zealand Human Rights Review Tribunal, and in 2018, Dr. Hickey was appointed as a director to the Housing New Zealand Board and manages her own consulting company called Ukinga Consultancy. And talking about Dr. Hickey, it's a privilege here chairing this session because Dr. Hickey was the motivation for me to move into this research sector. She was the person to whom I spoke about my research first, and she said, "Yep, you go for it. Yeah, this is the right path." And I'm really glad that I'm here today. I would like to talk about Ruth Jones. Ruth is Rongo Fakata, Te Aitanga Mahaki, and Ngatiparo. She was born, adopted in the closed adoption era, and has lived most of her life in Christchurch. Ruth also has lived experience of disability. Ruth is a qualified social worker, having trained at Canterbury University, and has worked in the disability sector and as a practitioner and manager for the last 20 years. She has a passion for her community and working in partnership with whānau and organizations. Ruth has extensive networks and experience across the disability, not-for-profit, Maori, and government sectors. Currently, her main governance roles are with the Ministerial Advisory Board for Rangatamariki, the Redress for Survivors of Abuse in Care Design Group, and the EV Maori Partnership Board Te Tauraki within the Ngai Tahu Takiwa. In 2016, Ruth and her husband Gary started a whānau ora initiative, He Whaka Piki Maori, where tangata and whānau whakahi, tautoko, each other to have the competence and confidence to be Maori, first through collective strength and whānau ora navigation. Ruth is also a co-founder of the Earthquake Disability Leadership Group, EDLG, set to advocate for accessibility in post-earthquake Christchurch in 2011. Now, as I said, I welcome all of you again, and talking a little bit about our webinar for the day. It's an update on the Tangata Waikaha Disability Waitangi Tribunal claim. And we've all been waiting to hear from from the ministry about certain things. We were just talking about the recent notification that has been brought into action, and from the 18th, and quite interesting developments or changes happening there. So we would let the experts talk more about it. Just before we move into it, I would like to talk a bit about the housekeeping, which is a reminder for people about the community code, which is displayed here. You must have been in other seminars or other webinars in this, spree of sessions, so you would be well aware of these. And I would also like to remind all the participants or all the people here to know how they can interact with us. They can put their questions in the Zoom Q&A area. Although even if there are questions coming up in the chats, we will be taking note of them, but just so that they're not missed, would be best to put them in the Q&A space. And there would be live captions running, so you'd be able to utilize those as well. I would also like to let you know that there would be a moderator on hand to facilitate the discussion. Feel free to use use them to share your thoughts, share links, etc. And now I would just hand the stage over to our speakers for the day.
Kia ora koutou. Thanks, Gopal. It's great to see you again and have you moderating our event today, or chairing our event today. And I also want to acknowledge those who have passed from our community in the past year and acknowledge the grief of their whānau, in particular Sarah Holton, who I came to know quite well through her mum, and who was a great artist. I just want to acknowledge, because sometimes we tend to forget that we've had members of our community passing, not just from COVID, but from life as well. And it's really important we do remember them. She was Māori. She had just received the award for Māori of Artist of the Year and passed away several days before her 30th birthday. But she had a life. She gave everything to our community. She was a valued member, as all of us are. So I was aware of the claims being heard around over 10 years ago, and I decided to place a claim into the health claims phase 2. We tried for phase 1, but they wouldn't hear disability claims other than Ngāti Kāpō for some weird reason. And so we had to wait. And in that time, the government decided in its wisdom to create the new health entities, Te Whatu Ora, Te Aka Whai Ora, without having heard the disability claims coming up before they'd make that decision. So we weren't included in phase 1. One of the other issues that was compounding the issues we have as disabled entering the health system or the disability sector is that when they did the health and disability review, Heather Simpson did not engage or consult with disabled. And so we were mentioned on page 150, but it was clearly not from a disability perspective. So it further entrenched my need to get my claim heard. And I couldn't do this on my own. Even though I submitted the claim, I had it open that if any other Māori disabled wished to join it, they could. And I was so glad that Gary and Ruth were one of the couples that did join. We also had Professor Tristram Ingham and his wife, Bernadette Jones, and a couple of others as well. And because of that, it meant that disabled people ourselves were able to present our argument, and not just the providers or the parents of or suppliers of services, but us with our lived experience. And for Māori, disability is not a deficit. It never has been a deficit, and it never will be. I am not, Huhana, the lady with MS, or that disabled person. I'm Huhana. That's it. My pronouns are ia, because Māori also didn't have pronouns prior to colonisation. And I do not believe that we need to be medicalising our disabilities further by utilising Te Pou's term, which are based in a bio-Western medical framework. So my claim was basically about acknowledging that we existed prior to colonisation but we didn't exist as it's seen in the Western world. We existed as whānau members. We existed as integral members of our communities. Our blind were often our keepers of whakapapa, the knowledge through pūrākau. They could tell you the knowledge, or they kept the astronomy, or they kept the histories and things, or they were mere artists of massage, because their hands were so tuned into our bodies. Our deaf were often scouts, guides. Our intellectually disabled were often carers, gardeners. Some were even warriors. Some of our women were warriors. Some of our men were caregivers. We were fluid in just about everything we did within our marae structure, within our pā. And disability wasn't something to be afraid of. We were embraced, and it's evidenced through our immortals, the stories. Mahuika, goddess of fire, was blind. Murirangi Whenua was blind, disabled, physically disabled, and hearing issues, gave the magic jawbone to Maui, who was clubfoot. So for me, this entire journey was about acknowledging who we are, first and foremost as Māori, and secondly, our rights as disabled Māori to be able to live our lives as we choose. In the past, the government denied whānau being paid as carers. My right as a Māori meant that that was breaching te tiriti. And so that's why we put this claim forward. It was a very powerful day for me, one that I'll never forget. And then I got to listen to everyone else's stories. And I have to say, I felt closer to my colleagues that spoke to my claim, because I felt a connection that we've never really talked about or had before. We've always all been busy fighting the system, fighting the processes, and always advocating, that we've never taken the time to learn about each other. And this, the Te Ariti claim gave us that opportunity. And as a result, I believe that we actually were able to tell the Crown and show the Crown why it's so important to rejig our systems to recognise Māori disabled as central to every part of life within this country. And every part of our Māori identity is as important to us as it is to our whānau, to everyone around. That when we look at our autistic whānau, for instance, we don't see them as being in space. We don't see them as being spacey. But the traditional view was that they were very close to heaven and the atua, and that's why they disconnected from earth. So in understanding from our framework, you get to understand why disability is not a deficit, but an actual asset to our community. And that's a very important part of all of this. The claim is still being heard. There was hearings last week. With the news on the 18th, where most disability funding apart from wages was cut, it's actually now led to more breaches of te tiriti. So as Helen Leahy from her iwi, they laid in a complaint this last week. So the hearings are still going on, but it's getting stronger and stronger as more and more are coming forward and being able to state why it's so important that Māori disabled be able to have the right to serve their community and to have their disability supports done as they wish to have them done. I'm dying for the day to go home and visit my mum again at the Urupa. I miss the meetings at the marae because I haven't been able to go, and I can't go right now. Hopefully we can get that sorted. Hopefully through the treaty claims, we can start to settle and find out that it's not always about money, but it's about the dignity and right to make decisions that we know are appropriate for us culturally, whānau rise, physically, emotionally, and mentally. So I'll pass that over to Ruth, because really looking forward to hearing from people's questions.
Kia ora huhana, ngā mihi nui ki a koe, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa. Ko ai au ko Ngāti Parau me rongo whakata o ko iwi, ko Here Rupe ki Waiapu, me Ngāti Maru o ku hapu, ko Rahui, me whakatu o ku marae, ko Ruth Jones tōku ingoa. Thank you, Huhana. I was expecting you to speak for longer because you'd have that such an important story to tell. And I know that Gary and I were pleased to be part of that story, to be part of that claim, because we wanted to support you we wanted to ensure that there were more perspectives, as you said, to speak to the Waitangi Tribunal, and we wanted to make sure that there were different perspectives. So thank you for leading this process for us. I too look forward to questions. I think our why I've explained, and the context to our claim was to support huhanas, and to, as my husband wrote a piece for the Human Rights Commission many years ago, and I'll steal it from him. He talked about all the roles he was as a Māori man in Tukumari Bay, but what he said was if every step he takes to leave that place, he walks into a place that is more judgmental, less trusting, and doesn't see him as that person with the whakapapa that he is. And I think that applies to all of us. So I think that Huhana talked about us being need to be seen, to be surfaced, our stories to be told, our pūrā koutamata, our tupuna to lead us actually into this new framework. And I would say, along with Gary, that we are very much a treaty partner, te tiriti partner as well in this community. We are part of the Māori community that is wanting to ensure that all rights for Māori are upheld, and that there are no breaches for all Māori. So in this kōrero that I'm giving now, that's a huge part of what we wanted to say in our claim. I mean, we talked about different things in our claim, but I think if I quickly just look at our recommendations, there were probably a couple of things that I wanted to surface, and they were, and I've written them down to be because I over prepare, to be an effective treaty partner, for people to listen to us and for us to contribute, because I think that's the kicker. Like I am absolutely worried about what's happening to services and supports for disabled people, but we're not a passive recipient of services. We are an active treaty partner. We are contributing to our communities all the way through, and I think that needs to be recognised. I think we need to think about the data and the lack of data that we have. Therefore, people are making assumptions about us, which has played out in the most recent changes in the policy that's been actioned this week. So I think there's data, there's us being a treaty partner, and shifting from that paternalistic approach to a relational approach. I think when we think about disability, and this is what we said in our claim, is that there's EGL principles that we need to, Enabling Good Lives principles, that are so important for disabled people, but they were started with whānau ora outcomes. So whānau ora for me and Enabling Good Lives sit hand in hand, and Enabling Good Lives being the younger sibling of whānau ora, because whānau ora as Māori keep us safe. And I think the thing is that as disabled Māori, we're in this sort of binary position where we often have to decide whether we be Māori or disabled. And I just want to put out there right now that we're both, and that all of us need to be honoured, so that we can lead the full lives that we deserve, and that we can be contributors to this beautiful country of ours. So I think those are the big recommendations that we put. But I think, like Huhana said, the claim is still continuing, and I look forward to a time where not only that we're recognised by the Crown, but if I can be a bit contentious here and say, we also want to be recognised by our iwi, because I think that as we make this claim, it's really important for us to be part of our Māori communities. And I think our Māori communities have been colonised like everybody else. It's called, I think we talk about colonial ableism. So Māori providers also have to get on board with a really current but not current way of thinking, because as Huhana said, our tupuna had really clear ideas about how we need to be represented in part of our community back in the day. So let's bring that forward now. So let the Crown be responsible for what they're responsible for, and let our Māori communities also do the same. So yeah, I also look forward to questions, and yeah, thank you for your time, and to Huhana for starting this process for us. Ngā mihi, kia koutou.
Kia ora. Hey, before we stop and answer questions, I just wanted to do an update as well, in that I'm also one of the lead claimants in the Te Aka Whai Ora claim because of what's happened with the closing of the Māori Health Authority. It's now led to all the work that we were doing. I know you and Gary were doing work there too in that space, and several others, where we were forming a partnership and a relationship with Te Aka Whai Ora to improve services for Māori disabled, which now has meant my lawyers have acted and placed an urgent claim in, which was accepted with Dame Te Reiti Moxons and several others. So I think there's about 5 main claims there. So that's another element that's being set up. And then we've got this claim still going. It's going a little bit longer, but I think it's almost winding up. However, Helen Leahy and her iwi actually did a direct challenge to the Crown regarding the 18th of February cuts to disability funding, and basically laid it out that that is cruel, unfair. Now, we need to also remember that Māori disabled, only 16% overall are doing any forms of supports or services, but under EGL, over 30% of Māori disabled and their whānau have been able to partake of these services, which shows that enabling good lives, even though I'm not a recipient and I'm a little resentful on that side, it's not personal. The reality is that there are whānau finally getting access to something that they've been denied all these decades. And so there's also been an ongoing inequity between access to services and non-access to services. And the bulk, even my own in-laws, we have a large number of autistic whānau members, children. My own in-laws refuse to access any kind of funding and support. Whether it's pride or whatever it is, they don't want to deal or handle the hoha nature of having to deal with bureaucrats. And part of our claim is about breaking that bureaucracy down and creating a system that's fairer for disabled Māori to be able to participate, but also for the fact that we're not just individuals, but we're part of a collective. We're part of an iwi, a hapu, and a whānau. And it's incorporating the funding to be able to enhance that culturally for our community, which may not be popular at the moment out there in government, but it is for us. We're not giving it up. And so I just wanted to add that extra point. But as an adoptee, I also didn't grow up under tikanga either. And it's something as an adult I've had to learn and grow into. But there's so many of our community, the younger Māori disabled, some of them are going on to be doctors, lawyers, teachers, social workers. Others are going on living a good life as long as their parents are being supported and resourced. They're giving their children great lives. And this is why we can't lose the funding, why it's so important at this moment, and why this claim is so needed. We have one question. Should we try, Ruth? What is the timeline for the Waitangi Tribunal claim, and can a response to the recent cuts be included? Well, it's in the end stage now, but I would say talk to, if you've already got a lawyer into the claim, talk to them, or I'm happy to, if you want to pass your email to wherever, send me an email. I give permission for them to give you my email, and happy to pass it on to my lawyers and see if there's an opportunity. But we're near the end. However, it's not the end of that. So let's just say that there is action being taken. I've also been speaking with a group of lawyers who are looking at taking action on that issue alone. The 18th of February, there's a group of us. I won't be leading it. I haven't got the health to lead it, but We've got Rob Campbell, the director that resigned last year from Te Whatu Ora. He's on board. We've got Kylie Quince, the Dean of the AUT Law School. We've got Chris Gledhill. We've got a whole bunch of young lawyers that have got the energy, the passion, and are quite keen to take further action. So if interested, you have permission to have my email address.
I think for me,
Wicked.
Huhana, like there's the claim stuff, and maybe I don't want to hoof off into another direction, but as a community, I absolutely agree with you. We need to band together now, you know, and I think that's being played out by iwi, by you know, the various, I'm imagining you did the same thing, the various Zooms we've had all during this week.
I'm
where
exhausted.
And I think that we, in a sense, I'm thinking of my mate Kate Grace, who said we actually need to look after ourselves as we go down this
Yes.
track, because I think as a Māori disability community, we need to keep ourselves strong to do the good work. So I think it's two things. We need to plan forward, have a line of sight, and also look after ourselves as we do the business.
I think also that even though we're focusing on Māori in the claim, it actually, if it benefits us, who are actually the lowest uptake of any support services and things that are happening, it's actually going to benefit everybody else. And not everyone functions in a bio-Western kind of medical framework themselves. Not everyone lives in an individualistic westernized lifestyle. Many, many people living in Aotearoa live collectively, multi-generationally. Many of them care for each other, care for whānau. So when I talk about whānau family cares, I mean, I'm thinking of my Filipino daughter-in-law that calls me mum and embraces a very similar cultural thinking around whānau that we do as Māori. And I'm thinking of her. I'm thinking of my neighbours who are Chinese, Vietnamese, Indian, and they all live multi-generationally. And I think that's where we've always had a problem with our funding or with any of our services, is that they treat us as individuals, but yet we bring with us a whole whānau. And sometimes 30 or 40 of them will turn up when we're dying at the hospital, and they have to empty out a hospital room to accommodate them because they won't leave, because it's so important to be there when someone is passing away. And the same in disability is that we've been taught to think of it as, I'm very sorry, your child is born with cerebral palsy or got Down syndrome, rather than wish to celebrate, you have a lovely, healthy little baby. Yes, your baby is disabled, but here's some networks, information, support we can offer you. And what can we do with the whānau to help bring you all up to speed on how to raise this child? Rather than seeing the value of how we can do this, we've got a culture that has basically institutionalized our community, has demeaned us. You know, we were hearing a preacher the other day called someone in a wheelchair, challenging him. He was a useless eater. Though that type of language, you know, we're losing touch with who we are as people and as a community. We have so much vibrancy and life in our community, and society fails to see it. We really do need to get some real disabled politicians into Parliament, and we need to get them to challenge the system. Until the political parties see the value in us, we will always be the second fiddle, and that's the part that has to change.
I mean, the absolutely, and the thing that I'm most saddened about are that our children are looking down on us, but also our babies to come. You know, we've worked so hard. We have worked so hard at building a system that is only 50% right at the moment. But I think of our babies coming forward, and there should be so much hope. There should be so much hope. And there is no way that I would want to say that I wouldn't want a disability. I want my disability really clearly, because it's who I am. You know, it's part of my whakapapa. But I want to have our babies and our kids grow up also being proud. And they'll will only be proud if they've supported to be all of who we are. Hey.
Well, exactly. I mean, I was raised to believe that my mother wanted me dead, my birth mother, because I was disabled, and they told her I was dying. So she left. She was 16. And they lied to her. They lied to my adoptive whānau as well. But I grew up believing I was, well, my adoption papers, an imbecile and an idiot. And I'm going, how did they know me? I mean, I was a preem baby who couldn't talk or do anything, and yet they had already decided my fate. And I think that's the problem. We've relied a lot on the medical system to define us. We really don't need defining. We don't need curing either. I would not be who I am today without my lived experience of disabilities. And, you know, I mean, I've known your man for so many decades, you know, Gary, that he, you know, and he put in perspective for me about, here was this man who was a CEO, and here he was with all these clear disabilities, and yet he was a CEO. That blew me away. I began to see that disabled people could have potential, and it drove me to get where I've gone today. But now my focus is on our rangatahi, you know, bringing them up, encouraging education, but bringing them forward. I think we've got a couple of questions in here.
Yes, well, I'll just probably read this question out, and then you can decide who would want to go first. So Anne Kelly Costello says she's interested in both of your whakaaro on how you would like the Crown to partner or work with Maori disabled. By that, she means not just Waikaha, but Crown overall. The question further says, I know some claim settlements, the land-based ones, can be really tokenistic. How would you like the claim to be visionary regarding what having disabled Maori voice there?
You go here, Hannah.
I knew you were going to be, she asks hard questions, this one. I knew you'd ask me a tough one.
Oh, tautoko.
Look, I remember saying years ago to the staff at the time, Ministry of Health, when the case was going forward, the Atkinson and Ministry of Health case around carers being paid as whānau being paid as carers. And I reminded them then that they were breaching the treaty by going ahead with denying paying whānau as carers. And I got fobbed off. Well, the Crown lost the case $16 million later. And then they implemented it, but then put a limit on who could lay a complaint about how they were implementing it by amending the Bill of Rights Act to deny us to take any cases. The problem there is that we were not being seen equally. The only way we can go forward, this is my own personal belief, is I believe Waikaha should have been an independent policy team advising every single ministry around disability, focusing on that. The legacy accounts, like the money side of things, should have stayed where they were, but they should have focused on that. And we should have had local branches, even if they were at work and income offices, of an advocate in each area where disabled, or even having an independent place where disabled could go in, get information, get advocacy, and get direct answers, that the people would be proficient in sign language, would be proficient in communication with people of differing needs, and be able to answer the questions. What we got, because non-disabled see it differently, and it was clear the Crown made decisions without really engaging with us on how to set this ministry up. And it's become a mess because they had to contend with all these legacy accounts being transferred over, which became a big mess. And of course, now we're in the situation where there's no sustainability of funding because nobody bothered to put in place a policy of how are you going to fund everything. They should be partnering with us. We are Tiriti partners. We're not an interest group. We're not even really just a disability group. We are Tiriti partners. Therefore, it should be a partnership. In Canada, they have First Nations Parliament. We did have one for Māori that was kind of taken away. But they have their own Indigenous courts, for instance. So they might get tried and held guilty in the mainstream courts, but then they go to an Indigenous court with a lawyer that's been approved, and they discuss the punishment, which is fair. Now, for disability, what we should be doing is having a partnership, but Māori should have the right, with their own allocated funds, to go and deal with it as they choose. Basically, like I have my funding package, I should be allowed to spend it how I choose to spend it on my carers and that. And everyone should have that right, not just Māori, but everyone, because it's how we spend it. But I have to pay for carers, so I've got to take responsibility and manage that. And this is where sometimes support is needed for some people that can't manage it on their own. I can. But with the right support, it shouldn't be the agencies or the Crown deciding how that money is spent. It should be for the disabled person with the guidance around, well, you need this amount for caregivers, you need this amount for travel, this amount, blah, blah. It should be down to our hands, conversation with the people that are handling the money on our behalf. I know that Te Ture Whenua Act still has in it, you were talking about claim settlements, etc. I know with the Te Ture Whenua Act, there's still within it a piece of legislation that says that certain disabilities mean that the whānau can make decisions on their behalf. It's still problematic because sometimes whānau don't understand disability either, because they've got the very colonised viewpoint of disability. We need the Crown to support us to actually go and educate every iwi, every hapu, and preferably every whānau about disability. Because there's a mix-up. When the Bible first came in, the missionaries were providing medicine as well as teaching the Bible, the Old Testament. And Deuteronomy 21 got literally translated by quite a lot of Māori at that time, which meant that we carry the sins of our ancestors. So we either have a maketu, a curse, or a hara, transgression. And there's still some Māori that actually think like that. So we have got to get away from that thinking by educating our own communities and reminding them that we are whānau members, and we need to start looking at getting marae more accessible, allowing service dogs. All of this stuff will take time, but we've got a lot of work to do to get a partnership truly going between the Crown and Māori, and particularly between Māori disabled and Māori. And that will take a lot more. I know that's a roundabout kind of answer for you, but for me, I don't want the Crown deciding who the Māori voices are. I'd like my community to decide who the Māori voices are going to be in there. That makes sense.
And I think just to tautoko that there is if we were asked about how do we want to partner, we are a treaty partner because we have whakapapa.
Aye.
And whakapapa is the thing that is the equalizer. It's like Māori. If we have whakapapa of Māori, everything and everyone has Māori, so therefore everyone and everything must be equal. And for me, the same thing happens with whakapapa. So that's how we interact. So therefore, to be a treaty partner, we have the right, and we need to have the right to be part of whānau hapu and iwi. And I think I don't want to be too staunch on our communities, because of colonisation, Māori have been taught to think really differently. So I think in order to be a treaty partner, we need time to unpack that stuff with our whānau hapu and iwi, and really highlight our whakapapa, because yes, I have this disability, but yes, I'm rongo whakaata, Ngāti Porou, te mea te mea. And that's the thing that gives us the strength. And just really briefly on whaikaha, I think that what I have seen is the service actually take precedence over everything else within whaikaha. So, the funding was a lift and shift from the Ministry of Health to whaikaha, and that service really is the one telling the story now. And we used to have an Office of Disability Issues, and we were looking forward to whaikaha representing us, not only paying us. So there comes the rub, I think.
And I think we also need to remember too that within whaikaha are whānau. That is disabled whānau. Paula, the CEO, is the first disabled CEO working for the Crown. And instead of us bringing her down, and yes, there is criticism and she recognises it, we need to also remember to awhi them, support them, because they're still whānau. And there's many disabled whānau working in there too, and they're feeling sick. If anything, this is really hurting them more than any other public servant within the state at the moment. So let's you know, just remember they're not just public servants, they're also whānau. Yes, we need to challenge them. Like when we go on the marae with our raru, what do? We have a talk fest until we resolve it. And then we go and have a hakari or a nice feast afterward, because that helps us to settle the disputes. We come together and then we become whānau in harmony again. And that would be really helpful to do that. Also, what would be useful temporarily able-bodied folks? I remember the old saying, oh, you're just a tab. That used to be a diet drink in the 70s, I think it was, or early 80s, called Tab. So every time I see that languaging, I'm thinking of Tab, you know. I think it was a Diet Coke of some kind. What's useful is just being with us, supporting us and enabling us, but also advocating on our behalf sometimes too. But remembering our voice is there as well. Don't forget, don't take our voice away. Help enhance our voice to the top wherever we can, if that helps.
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. We've got a couple of 3 more questions here. So I've got a question by one of our attendees who has asked, how is the progress going on making maraes accessible? And do you want to answer that? Or?
Yeah, can I just nick in really quickly? I think there's a lot of, this is a layered conversation. I think we need to think about the claims that are happening at the moment for iwi. You know, I'm within the Ngāi Tahu Takiwā, and they're more than 20 years down the track. But there are iwi that are still having their claims heard, and they still don't have any pūtea. So I think when we talk about marae accessibility, we need to think about that as well. I mean, Huhara, I'll let you take the lead in this, but I think, you know, I think we just can't think of accessibility. We need to think about how do our tipuna embrace us, because the tipuna are the whare themselves. So if we think about that, then it becomes a different conversation. I think absolutely, I want to be able to get into my marae, you know. But I think it's a really nuanced conversation that I look forward to keep on having with people. Thank you. You go, Hannah.
Oh no, you're spot on. I'm thinking of marae up Northland, and it's ironic because my wife's marae, both of them were quite accessible. And the first one, Motatau, was actually the late Tauhenare MP and during the Spanish flu time. Their marae is fully accessible and I can go there without a problem. And they've got deaf whānau as well as physically disabled. And it's one of the most beautiful marae I've ever had to go into. Funding is the biggest issue. And as you say, Ngāpuhi have not yet settled any claims, so they have no funding. Waikato has, and people get their modifications done, they make applications, and marae are slowly being updated and made more and more accessible. Our whānau marae is fully accessible, our other one isn't fully accessible, but it's getting that way. Over time, it's all around funding, and if a lot of iwi and hapu as yet have not had their claims settled, then they've got no pūtea to make anything accessible. But whānau try, and I'll give them credit. I don't blame them. I still have to sleep at hotels whenever there's a tangi on, because the only place I can sleep is actually at Motatau Marae, which has hospital beds in a back room there, especially. And my sister-in-law fight over the 2 that we've got. So, you know, it's I usually win, but I think she's going to win this time, next time. But it's so important to recognise that it's around the lack of funding. It's not from the lack of trying, because one of the biggest things for a host marae is to be able to manaki everybody, welcome everyone. And they feel embarrassed when you've got to come in through the side or the back door or be carried in your wheelchair, because for them, they've dropped the ball and they feel bad about it. So instead of embarrassing them, we need to support them to get funding to get their maraes upgraded.
So thanks, Hannah. We've got our next question by Anne Hunt. She's obviously acknowledged about you mentioning about looking after one's health, and they've asked about their intellectually disabled autistic grandson who's currently in custody on remand because he was unable to access the specialist support he desperately needed. And he's also suicidal and has been so since the age of 5. Any recommendations?
Oh, I'd be talking to a lawyer now. The reason I would is he should be under an IDCCNR, which is the Intellectual Disability Compulsory Care and Rehabilitation Act, and get the appropriate specialist support he needs in order to be able to deal with whatever has put him in jail, into custody, but also to get the appropriate supports in places like Te Rōpū Taurima. I would definitely be talking to a lawyer to see if you can get the courts to reassess him for his IDCCNR, whether he qualifies, and if he does, put him in through that system. Again, if you guys can put up my email somewhere, I'd be happy to talk to you, Anne, about what's the best process going forward for that, if that helps.
Thanks, Suhana. Anything to add, Ruth? Okay. Ruth, there was a comment in the comment box mentioning about what role could media play in our previous discussions. Before we move on to the next question, I thought I'll just mention that to you.
To me,
Well,
Yeah.
great. It would be great. I mean, we look forward to that happening, and it may be happening sooner than some people think. So, because I think this is about our community banding together. So, it's about the messages. I think we need to be really clear about the messaging, you know, and the more collective messages we can have, the better. That's what I'd say.
and we need to do that. We've had a lot of parents in the media, but I've done a couple of interviews, and a couple of other disabled have. I'm on Sunday tomorrow, on Sunday at 10:30, I think, on TVNZ. So to talk with Mariana about it, but it's really important. The media have been contacting, so they are on top of this issue. I actually warned them 2 weeks earlier because I received an anonymous email from a client who accidentally received a supplier warning that they had to look at cuts of 7.5%. So I was trying to warn people without saying too much, but I was aware something was going to happen. So, you know, it's the media are on top of it. They are aware of it, and they have been contacting different people. So that's already happening. And I don't think it's going away, especially if the lawyers do take a judicial review or another type of avenue forward on complaining about this whole issue.
Thanks, Suhana. Our next question is by Jane, who's thinking through how Tangata Tiriti can support in reinstatement of Te Aka Whaiora, general supporting Te Tiriti and everything. It comes in, this question has come out in 2 segments, so I'm relating those 2 segments rightly. So the question says, thinking through how Tangata Tiriti can support reinstatement of Te Aka Whaiora, in general supporting Te Tiriti and everything.
Lobby, lobby, lobby. We need you to. We need as many people to let them know that what they've done is a big mistake. It has never been about race. The whole issue of Te Aka Whaiora was to bring equity to the health system and bring everyone up together. The problem you've got is the last deprivation statistics that were done, sorry, academic brain, I get trivia, my ADHD brain has trivia going 40 years back, I think. But in 2001, they did a deprivation statistic, Ministry of Health, which said that Māori disabled were the most deprived group in the country. The second most deprived group was Māori non-disabled. Then halfway down the bar was non-Māori disabled, and then further down were the other demographics. They didn't do any more after that because I think it frightened them then. Te Aka Whaiora was the first step for decades to bring equity in our health system, and now they've taken it away. On top of that, this whole disability, losing funding and all of that can lead to, because now it's restrictions on things like my medication, other stuff for a lot of disabled, like the young diabetics who can't access those $500 a month monitors to keep themselves healthy and well now because that's been stopped. we need everyone to lobby, inundate, drown them with emails, messages, follow the petitions. There was a protest this morning. If you're on Facebook, social media, watch it, read it, send things forward, share. If you're good at podcasting, I get bored with it. Myself personally, my own brain gets bored with me talking. But podcasts might be, do a podcast, do what you can. Highlight the issue, because part of the problem has always been no one has actually valued the 1.1 million disabled living in this country. The 24%, that is a big floating block. Remind them that if they ignore us for too much, we could end up voting in completely different directions. And 24% of the population, along with our allies and whānau, is a hell of a big voting block to do. So show them the value that we have by doing everything you can to support us. That would be fantastic.
And I think if that's a macro level, on a micro level, you'll see on Facebook too, people looking for carers, people looking for support staff. Spread the word. In order for us to do the mahi we do, we need the support that we need to employ, or that need to go through care agencies if you want to go that way. But the really important, the really practical stuff you can do is support disabled people, the support disabled Māori, by thinking about how our communities can grow. We have a whānau ora entity in Christchurch. We'd love to see more people there, not to help us necessarily, but to be part of our community. We can only do this with an increased group, of people that can take action. That just practically speaking, to also educate yourself and have higher expectations of the disabled people, whether they be Māori or non-Māori. And if you have higher expectations, then the rest will follow, because disabled people can do everything. And they can do everything because whether it's their presence only, whether it's the skills that we have, I think that if we need to be seen as completely competent. So that's what individuals can do. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I agree. See, we don't disagree on much. Say, Ruth and I, we're a good team here. I think we could make it work. We should have our own talkback show. I think they need a disabled commentator on the news. Oh, no, that's right. News is going now. We need to do the YouTube news channel and do it that way.
Yeah, that could be a game changer, actually. I mean, if you're looking at media not being very helpful, then probably
start our own news channel. You reckon we should bring up weekly news and do it as that's such a good idea. I won't get paid the same wages though. But, I think overall, yes, it feels like there's an attack on our community. It feels like there's an attack on Māori, and it's very hard to find one's balance in this journey at the moment. But I really encourage everyone, and you said it earlier, Ruth, about looking after ourselves, something I taught my health students, and a few of them have come back to me because they work at Middlemore. When I'm in there, they go, fire, I've been listening to what you said, and I've been doing it because COVID was hard. And what I do is I used to take them outside, make them take off their shoes. We'd surround a tree because we're all tree huggers suddenly, but surround the tree with their feet to the ground on grass. I make them close their eyes, and I'd actually get them to sense Papa Tuanuku and what's going on under there, and feel her, with the wind, tawhiri mātea blowing around us, tane mahuta touching the bark. Everything has a life, a mauri, in essence. So I'll teach them through breathing slowly, feeling the ranganui on their backs, feeling the wind through their hair, feeling all of this to rebalance and connect to nature. Because it is through that rebalancing that one can deal with the crisis situation, one can deal with the things we're struggling with. And so when it does get hard, even though I can't put my feet on the ground unless I'm not moving my wheelchair, I try and at least do all the other stuff, because it's so important that we really look after our health during this time. But also, it's not really, I don't think this coalition intended to make it go so bad for disabled, but it just ended up that way. So let's let's put it in perspective. We've got a job to do, and that is to get our funding restored and our rights restored. The other job is to develop the partnership of Māori disabled with Whaikaha, and the other job is that we work together. You know, it's this whole, like during the whole COVID, we're still in a pandemic. Why is it then that no one masks around us anymore? Why is it that when our disabled community die of COVID, nobody grieves us? You know, it's silent. When Sarah passed away, it was from COVID. It wasn't from, although she had seizures in the end, sadly, it was COVID. And so if people are saying, let's work together for the tangata tiriti and work together for te tiriti, that's great. But one way of working together is also looking after us and our safety in an environment that is very unsafe environmentally, disease-wise, with viruses left, right and centre, and with people threatening us and calling us useless eaters and telling us we should die. If I know that Seymour is intending to extend euthanasia to non-terminal. That's going to affect the disability community. Be on our side. Don't think what you think. Disability is not a horror. It's a journey. I have a grandson who's spina bifida, and I've supported him from day one. We sponsor him in his sports because his parents can't afford to. And he's beautiful. And he's growing into a gorgeous man. He loves physics. Hey, he's wanting to study at university, but he's loving wheelchair basketball and wheelchair sports. I want his future to be assured. I want the future of all the other mokopuna we have with disabilities. My own grandson in Australia is mildly intellectually disabled, possibly autistic, a whole range of things. I want him to have a future. I want them to see that there is no barrier in this world. The barriers we have are what society creates and what we put in our own brains sometimes. I may not be the nurse anymore that I used to love being, but I, went on and went worse and became a lawyer that everybody hates. But I did what I needed to do to achieve the goals I needed to achieve to make a difference in this world. And everyone has that potential.
Thank you, Anna. Gosh, this was heated.
Sorry.
That
time of day.
I think we're nearly at the end now, but I think what Huhana was saying was right about her students. But also, I'm just thinking of a woman we worked with our whānau entity who was 53. She was Māori. She had never touched sand. So if that's what we leave you with in terms of, and without experiences, we can't make informed choices. So for me, it's like, help us to do the things. We're lucky. On the screen, we're fortunate, but there are so many others who don't have a voice. So get people's feet in the sand. Let them experience things so we can do amazing stuff. And and that's what the claim's all about. If I could say that, Huhana, let us be ordinary people doing amazing stuff.
Exactly. You couldn't have said it better, Ruth. Thank you. I want to cry now.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Anna. So amazing. Let us be ordinary people doing amazing stuff. And Ruth, as you rightly pointed out, letting the Crown being responsible and more accountable. So this is kind of we're moving towards the conclusion of today's webinar because we have to be aware of the time and we are almost just there. So and thank you, Huhana, for pointing out that with the EGL coming up, whānau are getting access to services that they have been denied for a long time. And again, we have discussed that Crown has to reach out to the whānau. And Ruth, you clearly mentioned and expanded on the fact that people with lived experience have been looked down and they have to have a more important space in the Whaikaha and in the decision making on the table, so that we can have skin in the game. With this, I think Dr. Hickey and Ruth have provided us insights into the hearing process, and we have discussed the details of the claim, the tribunal's review process, and strategies to ensure non-recurrence of Te Tiriti breaches in this domain. Moving towards the end, I would like to thank you all thank all the attendees for joining us today and sharing your thoughts and asking these wonderful questions. I sincerely hope that we have been able to provide all the information within this short span of time. And I would also like to thank all our partners who have been displayed here. Thank you for such amazing support that they have provided for this whole venture to be successful. Now to end this, I would like to say another Karakia in the language Sanskrit. Om Swasti Prajabhya Paripalayantam Nyayena Margena Mahim Mahishaha Go Brahmanebhya Shubhamastu Nityam Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Loka Samasta Mangalam Bhavatu. Now this means, may there be prosperity to the subjects, the rulers protecting the world in a lawful manner. May all living beings have auspiciousness eternally. May all the people be prosperous. May the rains shower in the proper season. May the earth be prosperous with abundant crops. May the country be free from distress. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us today. Looking forward to see you at some point.